This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show. We are on WABC Talk Radio. Thank you to John Katzimatidis, who has created a powerhouse radio station. And we also have affiliates throughout the country. And I know a lot of people listening online. So thank you so much. On a beautiful Saturday afternoon to be joining us for the show. My next guest is Judy Shelton, who knows more about money than just about anybody that I could possibly have on the show. Judy is a senior fellow at the Independence Institute. She's on the Unleash Prosperity Economic Advisory Board, and we love her advice. She has a great new book out that is soaring on Amazon Economics. It's called Good as Gold. And that's what we have to do with our money, right, Judy? We have to make it as good as gold. And she also served as a board member of the European, what was that, European Bank? What was that, Judy?
Yeah, it was for the Trump administration. My title was U.S. Executive Director to the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. The U.S. puts up most of the biggest part of the capital for that multilateral development bank.
Got it. And where was that local? Where were you? Were you in Paris, or where were you?
That's in London.
In London. Okay, got it. Well, it is wonderful to have you on the show, and it is very timely to have you on the show because we want to talk about what's happening with inflation, what's happening with money, what's happening with gold prices. First of all, let's just start with your book and what motivated you to write this book, and what do you mean by good as gold?
I probably was motivated after the nomination process because I felt that there was sort of this smug disdain for any mention of gold, when in fact, in the times in history when the U.S. has been part of the international gold standard, or we were the anchor in providing a gold convertible dollar for the Bretton Woods system. You hear people talk with nostalgia about a rules-based system, but the fundamental rule was that you could convert the dollar, $35 for an ounce of gold. And I think it brought discipline. We had excellent economic growth for 25 years under that system. And so I think it's worthwhile to point out to people, as I try to do in the book, that when you have a dollar that is as good as gold, it not only gives you a level international monetary playing field, which then supports the logic of free trade,
right?
But it also gives people a sense that their dollar is solid. They won't have it debased 2% every year or more and lose purchasing power. And I think that's important.
It sure is. And I want to make sure that my listeners know and understand that you, like me, we were both appointed or nominated by Donald Trump to be on the Federal Reserve Board. And I didn't make it because I've got a lot of skeletons in my closet, but you didn't make it because the heresy in Washington that you would stand for something as important as making sure the dollar is as good as gold. I bet 90% of our listeners would agree with you on this. It seems like it's common sense. And by the way, can I ask you, when you say good as gold, are you for a gold standard, or what exactly do you mean?
What I have in mind is a very specific proposal, but the aim would be to set up a beachhead to put the country back on a fiscal sustainable path, because you really can't have sound money without sound finances. So what I propose is something that I think is actually doable. The United States is the world's largest holder of gold reserves. We have 261 million ounces, and we are carrying them at a book value of $42 per ounce.
By the way, is that gold? Is that gold at Fort Knox, or where do they put it? Where is it stored?
It is mostly at Fort Knox, also at the New York Fed, and a little at the U.S. Mint. But our holdings are substantial. And what I'm suggesting is that gold, it's the family jewels. But I think the United States should consider our current fiscal and monetary situation a family emergency. And I would propose that we issue a long-term bond, even as long as a 50-year bond.
Yes.
If we issue it in 2026 on July 4th, it could mature on our 300th anniversary.
I love that.
The signing of, I love
idea.
it too because, well, I think you're setting up a marker that we are going to be standing tall in 50 years, and we're going to get our fiscal house in order, and we're going to move toward a sound dollar and quit debasing our currency every year.
I love that idea. And, I too am in favor of a price rule. Now, you're talking about gold. I might expand that a little bit to commodities generally. But I think this idea, Judy, that we're making this up as we go along at the Fed is destabilizing and just creates a lot of problems. But, I wanted to tell you something and get your reaction to this, because I remember back in around mid-2018, I can't remember the exact year, but when Trump was president, sometime midway through his presidency, I wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal, and I suggested that because interest rates were so low back then, that we lock those low interest rates in, and we should consider issuing 50-year bonds, maybe 75-year bonds, maybe 100-year bonds, and that we could lock in rates as low as 3 or 4%, and that this would save the Treasury a lot of money. Now, when I told Donald Trump that idea, by the way, he was intrigued by it, and he said this sounded good to him, but a lot of people at the Treasury Department shot down the idea. But I feel like we probably should have done that, because, of course, interest rates have risen just as I had predicted in the Wall Street Journal. And now we're going to probably pay hundreds of billions of dollars more interest costs. So, but I don't think it's too late to do this. And I just wanted your reaction to that.
Well, I think that idea actually did get a lot of play at Treasury, because I was still involved with Treasury. They oversaw my position even in London.
Okay.
And during the transition, I was assigned to Treasury as the lead advisor on international issues.
Okay.
And we looked seriously at issuing a 50-year bond to see if there could be a market. And your idea of locking in the low rates is an excellent one, because, as you just said, here's the irony. When rates were near zero, it became an excuse for the government to overborrow.
Right.
We can run up the deficit financing because we can. It's so cheap. But now nothing changed. We're still running up the deficit financing, even as interest rates have been at a 22-year high. The problem is that you would think a rational business person would say, let's refinance the debt so that we can maximize the value of that capital while minimizing the expenses. But the government never thinks in terms of minimizing the expenses. They just tack on this now outrageous price of financing the debt, which now exceeds what we pay for defense. And they just tack it on as a larger future deficit. So we don't have the kind of logic and business discipline that your idea made sense, but not for government.
So why do you think it is that when you and I had suggested a price rule, that there'd be rules that everyone knows what they are, and that you're sort of taking some authority away from the Fed, the so-called geniuses at the Fed, and everyone knows what the rules are, and you abide by those, except for maybe during a war or a pandemic or some kind of extreme situation. My good friend Jeff Yass, who's with Susquehanna Capital, one of the smartest guys I know, thinks that if you do that, you take a lot of uncertainty out of the economy if everyone knows what these rules are. And, there's whole industries that have developed just to guess what the Fed is going to do.
Well, exactly. And the price rule idea, I even think using these bonds that I'm proposing, I call them Treasury trust bonds, could become part of a price rule, a threshold, that if the rate of return on those was at a certain gap from what the Treasury has to pay to get people to purchase normal, traditional Treasury debt, that would be such a strong signal to the Fed that people don't believe in the credit worthiness of government debt, and they would be forced to increase. But as you say, that there is this safeguarding of total discretion. And Janet Yellen in particular, testifying before Congress, resisted it and said, we don't want any mechanical rule to hold back our hands. And this is despite the uncertainty. But to me, the even greater irony is the same people who are so concerned about maintaining the independence of the Fed so it can't be politically compromised are the ones most resistant to rules. Yes. If there were rules, then none of it would be subject to being influenced by politics or anything else. And yet they don't want that. They want to leave that discretion in that group, which doesn't have a lot of intellectual diversity. And that group makes it clear they're relying on data, but the data is proving to be dubious. So there's no virtue in the way that they are carrying out monetary policy.
I'm talking to Judy Shelton, who's one of the smartest people on this planet on monetary policy. She should be the next Fed chairman if Donald Trump is elected, because she knows so much about how money works and how to keep our dollar stable in value so we're not eroding it away. And by the way, Judy, I think when you erode away the value of the dollar, I view that as a tax on the American people.
Oh, it's not. Yes, it is fully a tax. It is expropriation of property. Right. When people earn their money, and if they wanted to put it under a mattress, they should feel free to do so. It's meant to be a store of value. Yeah. But let's say they do that for 10 years, and even if the Fed pats itself on the back and says, oh, we hit our 2% rate, when they're ready to use that money, 20% of its purchasing power has been taken away.
It's been lost.
Without due process. And so, I think people should demand sound money.
Yeah. Can I hold you over for one more quick session? I know I promised I'd only take about 10, 12 minutes, but this is a fascinating conversation, and I want to ask you about inflation. Do you have a few minutes?
I'd love it, yes.
Okay, we'll take one quick break. This is WABC Talk Radio. This is Steve Moore, the host of The More Money Show, and we will be right back in 60 seconds.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC. I'm having a fascinating conversation with the great Judy Shelton, who is one of the smartest people in America on how we should manage our money, how much money should be printed, what the Federal Reserve Board should be doing. She is somebody I think that Donald Trump would highly consider to be the next Federal Reserve Board chairman. So welcome back, Judy. I wanted to switch our conversation to the issue of inflation, the I word. And I'm here to say that I think we have not conquered inflation. And I know a lot of people think, oh, inflation's over. I think the Fed seems to think so. I was disturbed by the 50 basis point reduction in rates, what they called the jumbo cut. And I wanted your reaction to what they did.
I sent a letter to the editor that the Wall Street Journal printed up saying that I thought it made no sense within the Fed's own parameters to cut 50 basis points. They went 8 straight meetings holding rates at the highest level in 22 years, and then it looks like they panicked. When they cut, they thought maybe they missed the boat in July, so they go 50 basis points just before an election. And now, outrageous. In retrospect, it looks outrageous. Political. It looked overtly political, and it looked silly. It looked silly when the job numbers came in strong, and now when we see the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, going up this week, it looks like they made the very mistake. They kept saying, whatever we do, we're not going to do that. We're not going to cave so soon by their own criteria and invite inflation to come back.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I guess great minds think alike, because I've been saying that for the last couple of weeks on this show, that I do think it was political. I mean, how else can you explain why you would cut rates by that amount of money right in the shadow of a coming election? And by the way, you know this, Judy, but I want to remind this to our listeners, that the next Fed meeting, do you know when that is, Judy?
Yes, it'll be November 7th. And the interesting thing is,
right after
it would
election.
normally be November 6th because they meet on Tuesday
Right.
and then they announce on Wednesday. That week, they're delaying it by one
okay.
day for the very reason that it would look political for them to be discussing interest rate policy. And yet I couldn't believe, it bothered me to hear Chair Powell doing this borderline panic, massive cut. 50% is a huge cut. And then say, and the labor market's fine and the economy's fine, because the only reasonable reason to do it, according to the Fed's criteria, would have been if they were extremely concerned about labor. So all of the things he said at the press conference sounded like, well, everything's absolutely fine. And why did we take an extremely aggressive move? It's illogical.
I couldn't agree more, and I think I think that the Fed has gotten some egg in their face for doing that, and I think it's especially ironic because you have Jerome Powell, who's been, pontificating for his entire term in office as Fed chairman. Well, we can't be political. We have to be divorced from politics, and then he makes what I think looks like an overtly political decision. By the way, I want to add one more thing to what you were saying, Judy, and get your reaction to this. As you know, I'm hyper obsessed with the commodity index because I look at it every morning. You can do this, folks. Go type in CRB index, go to Trading Economics. They will tell you what's happening every minute by the minute, what's happening to commodity prices. And did you know, Judy, since that Fed rate cut, commodity prices are up 11%. That's a lot.
That's a very important indicator. And now you're talking about the real economy.
Yes.
I'll tell you, an indicator I look at is how fast the gold bars fly off the shelves at Costco. Because I think that for a lot of people, that is their link to reality. And they have lost a lot of faith in the comments from experts, including monetary officials at the Federal Reserve. And they're starting to say, I want to diversify my wealth. I want safe, tangible assets. And I think a lot of damage has been done to the monetary integrity of U.S. currency.
So the other thing I wanted to add and get your reaction to this is there is an attitude in Washington and in academia that the Fed is like the Pope, that they're infallible, and I think that's just such a joke because they've made so many mistakes over the years. And but there was almost an indignant reaction to when you and I were both nominated to be on the Federal Reserve because we didn't drink their Kool-Aid. And you're so right that there's this. They always talk about diversity, right? But they don't want diversity of opinion on the Federal Reserve Board. And so I think that it's really important that people understand that the Fed is not infallible. I think Jerome Powell has made some major mistakes as chairman. I mean, he's the one who almost, you may recall, I think it was at the end of 2017 or 18, he was so tight, he almost thrust the economy into a recession. I remember being with Donald Trump and he was so angry about it. And finally, he decided to lower rates and the economy rebounded. Remember that. And then, of course, he was the one who let the inflation rate go to 9.2%.
Well, that's just it. And the Fed does come across, I think, as rather sanctimonious when it invokes its dual mandate as sort of a sacred duty. It's just that the Fed will say price stability is a responsibility of the Federal Reserve. Jerome Powell has intoned that very often. But there's no accountability. When they hit 9% inflation, nobody got fired for that. And even the way they define the mandate says that the Fed is supposed to deliver stable prices. They have reinterpreted that to mean stable inflation, which is an oxymoron. And so I think that a lot of the way that the Fed tries to sanctify its mission is really hiding the fact that you do have just individuals who are very much fallible, and we expect them to be omniscient, and they simply can't be, and they're using old data and then trying to project into the future. It would be much better if there were a basic strategy and a coherent framework that believed that people working productively is a good thing, not necessarily inflationary, but would take a stance on the fiscal overspending. That is a big part of
right.
the inflation dilemma.
And, Jerome Powell has not, unlike one of the things I always respected about Alan Greenspan, a former Fed chairman, and I think a very good one, is, when he would talk to Congress, he would admonish them. And same thing with Paul Volcker. Get your fiscal house in order. He would use the Fed chairmanship as a bully pulpit to tell Congress, look, we can't have a stable money if you're running these enormous deficits. But Jerome Powell never talks about fiscal policy. When he's in front of Congress, he almost never says, hey, you're running these massive deficits. That's making it very difficult to keep inflation under control.
He will say, we take fiscal policy as given, which I do think is a cop-out, and certainly doesn't compare to Paul Volcker saying what's necessary to have sound money. And so I think that he is not willing to tackle the real issue. And he always will say, he'll say this in his testimony to Congress, well, we're on the record as saying in the long run, we're on an unsustainable fiscal path. But I want to say, when does the long run start? Is it next week?
I think it's here right now.
We're there. We are there.
So Judy Shelton is a national treasure. She is the author of the new book, Good as Gold. She has the right prescription for how to stabilize the value of the dollar. As your friend and my friend, Arthur Laffer likes to say, stable money is one of the four pillars of prosperity. And one last thing on the way out, Judy. And by the way, Judy is a senior fellow at the Independence Institute. But I proposed in our hotline this week that if the Nobel Prize Committee had any gumption and any common sense, that they would award the next Nobel Prize in economics to Arthur B. Laffer. What do you think?
100% agree with you. He has shown, and you have documented, that when you lower taxes, you end up increasing growth and you get higher revenues. We had 11% higher revenues, still reflecting the benefit of the cut in taxes and reducing the regulatory burden that you engineered with President Trump. And it brought in excellent revenues. It's just that government outpaces it with even more spending. But Art was exactly right. He's been proven correct. And I think that the supply side formula, which, as you say, includes stable money, is still the agenda that will work for America and for the world to bring prosperity. And he should be acknowledged for that massive contribution to economic theory.
Absolutely. If they can give the Nobel Prize to somebody like Paul Krugman, who's been consistently wrong throughout his whole life, maybe they could give it to somebody who's been right his whole life. Judy, you are a superstar.
Well,
I appreciate
Medal of
so much.
Freedom, so yeah.
He did. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay,
it's
folks.
Delightful to be with you, and thank you.
Thank you. That's Judy Shelton. Her new book is As Good as Gold. Get it, folks, and also get my new book with Arthur Laffer called The Trump Economic Miracle. We will be right back. Oh, Judy, that was fantastic. Thank you so much.
You're so nice. Sorry to step over your talking at the end there. I was thinking, and you should be sharing in that Nobel Prize. You should, because I don't even.
Don't you know?
Right
I don't
now.
even have an economic. I have a master's, but I don't even have a PhD in economics. But it is a serious point. I mean, there's no one else even close that has had the impact on our thinking about economics. I mean, he advised Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, many leaders throughout the world. He's advised Donald Trump, and it just shows how do you not give it to him? I mean, it just makes me angry.
I love when I saw that you suggested that. Gil brought it up to me. He says, "Did you see this?" I went, "Oh, he's so right. That's so gracious of you too." But I'll just tell you quickly. Today I met for 2 hours. We're still in Paris. I just had a private meeting there's a guy, Jacques de la Rosière. He's 94. He was the head of France's central bank. He was the head of the International Monetary Fund. He was the head of that European bank in London where I worked. And when we discussed my idea, the book, he's reading my book, he said he wants to do it. He wants France to do the same thing as I'm
that's
suggesting to the US.
fantastic news.
But here's what he said to me. He goes, but you need a team. We have to do this right. And he said, here's who we should be talking with. Art Laffer. That's who he said, this Frenchman, Art Laffer. I said, funny. He gave the first blurb for the book.
That's fantastic.
Yes,
thank you for doing the show. I look forward to seeing you. I haven't seen you in a while, so I hope you next time you get to DC, let me know. I'd love to host a little dinner with you.
I'd love it. We'll do it.
Okay.
And I'm loving your book. I'm loving it. Congrats.
Thanks, Judy. Take care. Bye.